the details of that story, there was never an Igbo coup. Impeachment. Pandef Reconciliation Panel concludes Rivers engagement, returns to Abuja. DSS arrests Malami after release from Kuje prison. Confusion over alleged kidnap of 172 worshippers in 3 Kaduna churches. Sad development, but we will not give up, says Northern Khan. Adds 172 were said to have been kidnapped. 9 escaped. No one was kidnapped in Kajuru, say police. Council chairman. Abduction exposes grave insecurity and failure. That is coming from the PDP. Kanu, Governor Yusuf meets Tinubu, defects to APC today. Keep mums after meeting at Aso Villa. Anti-Tinubu post, federal government amends charges against Shuwore, deletes Facebook and X. Massacre of Christians, what we told the New York Times bureau chief, McLean. You want to read that story? But the story that really touches on the subject we are dealing with is this one, There Was Never an Igbo Coup, by Ralph Obioha. As we go, we look at more headlines in the newspapers. We have the Daily Sun here, The Nation, and we have the Punch newspaper. As we go, we'll talk more on some of the headlines. I was talking about the travails of democracy and the rule of law. Awolowo wrote this book to tell his story. But before we look at the book, let's look at what I have called Awolowo, the twilight of democracy will change into utter darkness. The twilight of democracy will change into utter darkness. The understanding of the past and its interpretations determine the values of the future. The crisis of the Western region immediately after Nigeria's independence in 1960, a fallout of the battle of supremacy between Obafemi Awolowo, leader of the action group, and his deputy, Samuel Akintola, is a story of the past, but the analysis of the events are lessons of history. Awolowo, having relinquished the premiership of the Western region in 1959, elects to move to the federal parliament for national leadership. He becomes opposition leader, and his deputy, Ladoke Akintola, leaves federal parliament for the region to take his place as premier. Some have said that was the blunder that Obafemi Awolowo made. How could he have left the center of power to the center? The center of power was in the region. Ahmadu Bello saw that definition. So Ahmadu Bello preferred to stay in the north because he felt the north was the center of power, and he sent his deputy to the federal center, the federal government, to become the prime minister. Awolowo and Azikiwe did not adopt that procedure. Awolowo wanted to be the prime minister of Nigeria, like Nnamdi Azikiwe also wanted to be the prime minister of Nigeria. So Awolowo, who was the premier of the Western region, felt that the Western region would do better if he went to the center and contested to be the prime minister of Nigeria. In this case, Akintola, who was in the federal parliament, had to relinquish his seat and came back to the Western region to take the place of Awolowo. Some said that was Awolowo's blunder, because power was in the region, the only power at the federal level was that of the prime minister. And if you missed out from becoming the prime minister, you lose power. Awolowo did not become the prime minister. He only became leader of opposition. And that demeaned his political power in the Western region. But he wasn't going to accept that. No sooner had this happened than both men engaged in a power struggle over the principles of government. Awolowo, as leader of the party, insisted on party supremacy, but Akintola believed in government supremacy. Akintola believed, I'm the premier of the Western region, let me govern. Yes, you are the leader of the party, but I am the leader of government. Let me govern. When you governed as the premier, no one interfered. That was the argument from the Akintola side. The argument from the Awolowo side, he said, means no. The party is supreme. And if the party is supreme, the leader of the party is the supreme leader of government. In that case, as the premier of the Western region, Akintola should take orders from Obafemi Awolowo. Akintola was not ready to do that over time. So when the Action Group crisis of 1962 ensued, when the crisis heightened following the 25th of May 1962 disorder in the Western Region House of Assembly, Tafawa Balewa, the Prime Minister, moved a motion for a declaration of emergency in the Western region, marking a turning point in the political history of Nigeria. The 1962 declaration of a state of emergency in the Western region was not the last straw that broke the camel back, but it set the flame burning. If you read this book, you will find the debate on the floor of the House of Representatives the day the state of emergency was declared. Awolowo recorded the discussions and everything that went on. He explained them in this book. From that moment, it was clear that the coupists were come. Remember, by 1961, Adewale Ademoyega in this book, Why We Struck, said they were already thinking of a revolution. Adewale Ademoyega joined the Nigerian Army in 1961, then known as Nigeria's Queen's Own Regiment. He joined the army. Before he joined the army, he was already thinking of a revolution. Remember, this is the primary text of the class, the primary text of the class. If you don't have this book, I advise you to get one, because we will read this book from page 1 to the end to have a proper understanding of why they struck. As we read, we will analyze. So this is the primary text of the class, and I've decided to add this to the primary text. You should have this too, the Travails of Democracy. It gives you the political foundation of how the reign began to beat us. The Travails of Democracy by Obafemi Awolowo. So having declared the state of emergency in the Western region, it marked a turning point in the political history of Nigeria. The emergency rule became the fuel that consumed the First Republic, leading to the military coming into government, and the situation eventually exploded into a civil war. A state of emergency is declared in the Western region as Awolowo is brought before the Coca Commission set up to investigate the finances of the Western region under his watch. Awoyi saw the investigation as the consolidation of the plot to humiliate Awolowo, who was at loggerheads with the Tafawa Balewa federal government that backed Akintola Western region. Okay. Having established that point, a state of emergency was declared in the Western region in 1962. After that, Obafemi Awolowo was dragged before the Coup Commission to investigate the finances of the Western region under his watch. At this point, it was clear that the political leadership in the North and the Western region was tired of Awolowo and they wanted to deal with him. Okay, let's read Awolowo's book, The Travails of Democracy, and then we can begin to form certain conclusions. It is his opinion. His opinion is not the final opinion. But because he is Awolowo, his opinion is thick. There's also the Ahmadu Bello opinion, the Nnamdi Azikiwe opinion. But Awolowo writes his story. Let's read. Reading is feeding the mind. I want to read from Adventures in Power Book 2. There's Adventures in Power Book 1. The Adventures in Power Book 1 is My March Through Prison. That's Awolowo's story. My March Through Prison. Adventures in Powers Book 2 is entitled The Travails of Democracy and the Rule of Law. So what is this book about? The Travails of Democracy and the Rule of Law is the second book of 3 under the general title Adventures in Power by Chief Obafemi Awolowo. It is the story of the violence and the fury displayed towards representative democracy and the rule of law, and the dehumanizing brutalization that characterized the early post-independence years in Nigeria. The Travails of Democracy and the Rule of Law will make history come alive for you. The Travails of Democracy and the Rule of Law will make history come alive for you. Awolowo wrote the book to define the dehumanizing brutalization that characterized the early post-independence years in Nigeria. So let's read. Let's read from the first page. Chapter 1. Awolowo titled it The Prelude. He says, during the 1959 federal elections, the Action Group had employed modern and orthodox tactics to conduct a massive and truly countrywide electioneering campaign. Its policies and programs were by far the best and the most articulated and publicized. In order effectively to reach the electorate, the Action Group had put practically every means of locomotion into action. Road vehicles of all kinds, river crafts, helicopters, and a small skywriting aeroplane, not to talk of motorcycles, bicycles, all these were brought into the service of the Action Group for mobility. All the other parties put together did not do half as much. So from this analysis, Obafemi Awolowo modernized electioneering in Nigeria. You can see what they brought out to show that the Action Group was ready for business. He says the National Council of Nigerian Citizens, NCNC was Nnamdi Azikiwe's party. The National Council of Nigerian Citizens, NCNC, felt intensely embarrassed and outclassed in a game in which the leadership regarded itself as past masters. Its pride was deeply wounded and its image of superiority badly damaged. Awolowo continues. As for the Northern People's Congress (NPC), it regarded the Action Group campaign tactics with adherence and as an abomination. It felt outraged, provoked, and humiliated. For the first time in all his political life, for the first time in all his princely life, even the Sardauna of Sokoto, Sir Ahmadu Bello, felt himself compelled to descend from his royal pedestal to take the roads and marketplaces to meet the common people to solicit their votes. You see what Awolowo did to Sardauna? He made Sardauna to come out from his princely garb, what some people would describe that the Sardauna came down from his Olympian height. Before Awolowo launched that massive campaign in the north, the Sardauna was not known to campaign. But when Awolowo arrived in the north to rev up the electorate, Sardauna became scared and was forced out to campaign. So Awolowo says to Ahmadu Bello and the other members of his ruling feudal hierarchy, take note of that word, feudal hierarchy. This was a novel, monstrous, and totally unbearable event. In the normal course of things, no one had dared or would ever have been tolerated to dare to challenge the leadership and behest of the Sardauna. In his realm, his word was law. It was his place and birthright to govern and command. Awolowo is describing Ahmadu Bello. Pay attention to this. This was one of the reasons why Adewale Ademoyega, Nzeogwu, Ifajuna, and Co. struck. Awo says it was Ahmadu Bello's place and birthright to govern and command, and it was the burden duty of the common people within that realm to submit and obey, whatever the subject, nature, and character of his rule and command. One of the things that the action group set out to do was to destroy the very basis of this feudal concept. Hey, are you there? How did Awolowo annoy the North? Remember, I have just talked about Awolowo dragged before the Coca Commission. And before we knew what was going on, Awolowo was dragged to court again for treasonable felony. How did he provoke the North? In 1962, Balewa declared a state of emergency in the Western region. Why? To deal with Awolowo. Because at this time, Awolowo's guys in the Western Region House of Assembly were ready to remove Akintola as the premier. They had the number and they were ready for a vote of no confidence. Knowing that a vote of no confidence was going to remove their ally in the Western region, the federal government declared a state of emergency to ensure that that vote did not take place. Remember, when members of the Western Region House of Assembly were gathered, a commotion took place in that regional House of Assembly that led to the mace of the House of Assembly being used for battle. But that was all that happened, and immediately a state of emergency was declared. That meant that Akintola ceased to be the premier, and a sole administrator was appointed for the Western region in 1962. That was how Dr. Maje Kudumi became the administrator. In recent time, Bola Ahmed Tinubu declared a state of emergency in Rivers State, and Fubara was suspended. So that was what happened in 1962. Akintola was suspended, and Maje Kudumi came in. But before you knew it, Akintola was reinstalled. By this time, Awolowo was heading to prison. So you can see the politics of 1962 keep repeating itself. So Awo said in his book, one of the things that the action group set out to do was to destroy the very basis of this feudal concept. He wanted to destroy Ahmadu Bello's political philosophy, feudalism, leadership of the elite, vassals. They owned the land. His words were laws. And Awolowo had the temerity to go into Sardauna's territory in the north, forced him out of his palace to come and campaign, and boldly made the claim that feudalism was not good for the north. And Awo said, one of the things that the action group set out to do was to destroy the very basis of this feudal concept. Did Awolowo draw the first blood? Did he? To every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Was that what happened? Let's read. Awo says, the action group made the point repeatedly that sovereignty over the people was vested in the people themselves, that no one was born to rule, and that only those who were freely elected by the people were entitled to administer their affairs for a prescribed period of time. Take note of these words. That no one was born to rule. Awo at the time had the feeling, the action group had the feeling, that Ahmadu Bello and his ilks felt they were born to rule, and Awolowo was out to challenge them. You know, Awolowo was radical in his perspectives. He was. If you read the lecture he delivered in Gold Coast University, The Need for an Ideological Reappraisal, you will see his ideological reasoning for the development of Africa. He continues, only those who were freely elected by the people were entitled to administer their affairs for a prescribed period of time. These, to the MPC, were forbidden political doctrines. One day, the Sardauna, after a series of public meetings and rallies, stopped at a catering rest house to have lunch. He took out his handkerchief, sneezed into it, and found that his nostrils were filled with dust. Not the dust from campaigning. He had to hit the road to campaign. The prince has been dragged out by the Awolowo effect. Awolowo says that Ahmadu Bello looked at the handkerchief with obvious dismay, shook his head, and said in a voice that carried the depth of his feeling of utter revulsion and resolution. He says, I shall never forgive Chief Awolowo for this. I shall never forgive Chief Awolowo for this. Awolowo has quoted what Ahmadu Bello said. That Ahmadu Bello said he will not forgive him. I shall never forgive Chief Awolowo for this. With the Sardauna himself mounting the rostrum to appeal to those he regarded as his own serfs for votes, all the members of the hierarchy, including the then incumbent Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, lost no time in following his example. We of the Action Group regarded this reaction as a very welcome and salutary augury for democratic practice in Nigeria. However, for the entire feudal hierarchy, all that was too much for them to bear. And they too must have vowed, like the Sardauna, never to forgive Awolowo. A report in the Sunday Express of 20th December 1959, at page 2, summed up the attitude of mind of the hierarchy. Here goes the report. So let's look at this report. Awolowo has represented the report in his book, What the North Felt at the Time. Quote, I shall divide Nigeria into two and hand them over to my lieutenant. Hey, are you there? These are the reasons for the first coup. Awolowo is telling his story in his book. He's quoting the Sunday Express of 20th September 1959, page 2. He's quoting what the North said. And when we say what the North said, we mean what the Sardauna Ahmadu Bello said. So let's read the quote. I shall divide Nigeria into two and hand them over to my lieutenants. Sir Ahmadu Bello contended that MPC's new decision to invade the South politically was a reply to the recent invasion of the North by Southern political parties. So it became tit for tat. If you can come to the North to force me out of my comfort zone, if you can come to the North to stir the people's emotion, I will also come to the Western region and you will see what I will do to you. I will also come to the Eastern region and you will see what I will do to you. So they made incursion into the Western region. Awolowo said that Ahmadu Bello cited a portion in the Quran which says, you have come to our home, and from now on, we shall be taking the battle to your house. Hey, are you there? Are you there? Reflect with me. You see the number scrolling on the screen? Yes, you can call that number to contribute to the discourse. You can call that number. But remember to be focused. Focus on the subject. Make it brief. Make it brief. Don't take the whole time. So you can call. The number is on the screen. That is 080 WhatsApp call. We want WhatsApp call. Call us on WhatsApp. We only pick WhatsApp call. It is clearer and louder. Okay? Yes, though there can be internet interruption. So the number is 080 999 18449. That is 080 999 18449. Yes, I'll be happy to hear your voice. Awolowo said that the Sardauna cited a portion in the Quran which says, you have come to our home, from now on, we shall be taking the battle to your house. Awo continues, Sir Amadu claimed that like his great-grandfather, Shehu Ottoman Danfodio, who he said after his conquest divided the conquered country between his two sons, I too, after conquering the south, we also divide Nigeria into two to be taken charge of by two of my lieutenants. If you don't read books like this, you will not find this kind of secret. If you don't read books like this, classics, you won't find this kind of secret. This is Awolowo telling us the story of the First Republic before the coup. Here is Awolowo telling us perhaps this is why they sent him to prison to deal with him, so that the Sardauna will take over the south, starting from the western region. And the military guys were watching. Sir Ahmadu Bello claimed that like his great-grandfather, Shehu Ottoman Danfodio, who he said after his conquest divided the conquered country between his two sons, I too, after conquering the south, we also divide Nigeria into two to be taken charge of by two of my lieutenants. He said the south had already been handed over to Alhaji Abubakar, the prime minister, and added that before his resignation from politics, he would appoint another lieutenant to take over the administration of the north. He presented a cloak of authority to Balewa. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I just read from page 1, 2 to 3 of the book, The Travails of Democracy and the Rule of Law. This is the original print of the book, not the reprint. Now, this book was published in 1987. That was the year Awolowo died. He was supposed to release Adventures in Power Book 3. So we don't have Adventures in Power Book 3, because he released this one before he died. And this is the 1987 edition. The print is the original print. It is clear. It cannot be compared to the reprint. This is the quality print. And if you want this quality print, you can get this book on udarabooks.com. It is one of the primary texts of this program. Why We Struck is a primary text, and we have added this to the primary text of the show. So we'll be reading from this book, and there's another primary text I will introduce to you. There was never an Igbo coup, Ralph Obioha, on page 16 of the Vanguard. And remember to order any of the books we mention here. You can also send us a WhatsApp message. And that WhatsApp message can be sent to the number on the screen. Let me see. All right. So we are on. The line is on. We want to hear from you. Let's look at more headlines in the newspapers. On the front page of The Nation, why PDP secretariat remains locked by FCT police. CBN, banks raised lending to firms, households in Q4 2025. Showore's trial for criminal defamation begins on Thursday. Abdulrazak, Emir Saraki, others mourn Ilorin chief imam. Nigeria ready for front seat in global economy. Shettima raises hope. Opens house in Davos. You find that headline on the front page of The Nation. Kano governor firms up APC defection plan. Alleged terror financing. DSS arrest ex-AGF Malami. Ex-minister collaborator remains abroad. Alleged terror financing. DSS arrests ex-AGF Malami. Ex-minister collaborator remains abroad. Who is that collaborator? If you read The Nation, you would know. Sanwo-Olu signs for 4.4 trillion naira 2026 budget. How assailants killed mother, 6 children in Kano by neighbors. So those are some of the headlines on the front page of The Nation newspaper. Talking about the coup. Chapter 5 of this book is entitled The Due Day. Let's feel the due day. Let's feel it. What was that day like? January 15th when they struck. The author of this book, the brigadier's daughter, has a story to tell. If you turn to page 17 of this book, The Brigadier's Daughter, page 17, who is the brigadier's daughter? It is Sholakwe Ademulegun. That's the brigadier's daughter. His father was the head of the 1st Brigade in Kaduna, Brigadier General Samuel Ademulegun. He was killed on January 15, 1966. He was one of the officers penciled down for execution by the coupists led by Nzeogwu in Kaduna. If you look at page 57 of this book, The Brigadier's Daughter, Sholakwe narrates the story of what happened that day. She said Saturday, January 15th, 1966, the day seemed like every normal one with the Harmattan air and cold winds. And then night time came. I had contracted chickenpox a few days earlier, so on that night, I slept with my parents. That was in their bedroom, face painted over with calamine lotion. I was fast asleep while my 4-year-old brother, the youngest of all 6 children my father had, was asleep in a nearby cot in the same room. History records the time to be between 2 a.m. and 2:40 a.m. To me as a child, it was the dead of night. I was awakened by noise. History lists 14 names of the soldiers that broke into our home and my parents' bedroom. I saw a multitude of soldiers while recognizing the leader of the gang as Major Timothy Onwatuegu, whom I called Uncle. Him and Major Nzeogwu being regular visitors to our home and at our dining table. I recall my first question was, "Uncle, what are you doing here?" To which I got no response. Sholakwe Ademulegun is on State Affairs. Let's listen to her story. You have written a book entitled The Brigadier's Daughter. You noticed Timothy Onwatuegu.
Yes, I did.
They came in. What happened that night?
It is the story of a night that is still a nightmare in my head. So they came in, a bunch of soldiers with guns, Major Onwatuegu with them. They were talking to my father. As a 6-year-old, of course, I had no idea what they were talking about. History puts it that they were asking him for the keys to the armory. Since he was the commander of the 1st Division of the Nigerian Army, I guess the army came under his garrison. They marched him out of the bedroom for a bit. I noticed my mother was talking and she was frantic. They marched him back. At a point, I noticed my father pulled the bedside drawer by the bed, because I was at that point I had rolled over to the edge to be able to see what was going on. History has it that he wanted to bring out his service pistol, rifle, whatever it's called. And the next thing I know, they cock their guns. My mother jumps in front of him with her arms, spread out like to protect him. And they rain the bullets. They rain the bullets. Blood everywhere. My mother was pregnant. It was more like they killed 3 people. Blood everywhere. Yeah. All over the floor, all over the walls.
We are talking about the January 15th, 1966 coup. This is the daughter of Brigadier Nzeogwu, who was killed in that coup. You stood there watching.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
You saw Timothy Onwatuegu.
Yes, I did.
You knew him before that night.
Yes, I did.
He used to come to the house.
Yes, he did.
To do what?
Well, of course, my father was his commander. He would come. The army was one big happy family. At least up to that point, before that point. He would come. Sometimes they'd have lunch with us. I remember the dining room. The address was 1 Kashim Ibrahim, Street Road, Crescent in Kaduna. And it was the official quarters. And he was a regular visitor. Whether official or unofficial, he was uncle.
Kaduna Nzeogwu was also a visitor.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Kaduna was like the epicenter of that coup.
So history says.
Your mom jumped in between the gunmen and your dad.
Yes, she did.
You can still picture her?
Yes, I can. She was in a nightie. She was pregnant. So it was a loose gown. I think pink. And she stood there. Maybe she felt they would show some pity. I'm a woman. They would show some pity. They know me. They've come here. I've probably cooked for them before. Maybe she felt, because I'm pregnant, they would, whatever it was that she felt or was going on in her head, I don't know. But she stood there.
And they didn't feel pity for her?
No, absolutely not.
Did they tell her to give way and she refused?
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
So one name that she kept mentioning in that interview is Timothy Onwatuegu. Timothy Onwatuegu. Who is Timothy Onwatuegu? Obviously a military officer. Let's read what Adewale Ademoyega said about Timothy Onwatuegu. First, he starts by saying, another shining light in the Nigerian army was Captain Timothy Onwatuegu. He was the adjutant of the 5th Battalion when I joined that unit in December 1963. Onwatuegu was a brilliant cadet at Sandhurst and first Nigerian to be made a junior under officer in that world-famous institution. He was unmarried when we first met, and we shared the mess life together. A Roman Catholic, he was active and could hardly be faulted in military duties. Because he was humble, senior officers found him useful, loyal, and dependable. At the same time, junior officers found it easy to work with him. He made himself like one of them. He was later posted to the Nigeria Military Training College and worked under Nzeogwu before I joined that unit in July 1965. Like any other young officer around Nzeogwu, Captain Timothy Onwatuegu's political ideas were soon formed and straightened with revolutionary principles. So Adewale Ademoyega has told us about Captain Timothy Onwatuegu. Sholakbe Ademulegun, in the interview you just listened to, said it was Onwatuegu that shot her dad, Brigadier Samuel Ademulegun. Live. She said she knew them. They used to come to the house. But on this night, they were there for action. It is sad. Sometimes I don't want to put myself in Sholakbe Ademulegun's shoes. Yeah, she came to our studios. We interviewed her. You can watch the full video on this YouTube channel. Once you just scroll down, I think we uploaded that interview in 2024. We uploaded it in 2024. So that's just to remind you of what the D-Day was like. We'll come to the D-Day, but as we wait to focus on the D-Day, we'll also be bringing preambles to the D-Day to prepare our mind. Now, there were other officers who were part of the coup, and Adewale Ademoyega has done well to define them for us. If you look at page 69 of the book, Why We Struck, page 69, Why We Struck, reading is feeding the mind. Let's read. Nzeogwu was a good leader of men. The same could not be said of 90% of the officers. He drew the younger officers irresistibly close to himself, endeavoring always to awaken in them both political and revolutionary consciousness, and above all, patriotism. He spoke amusingly, and all the young officers that had passed through his hands in the Nigeria Military Training College cherished him and held him in high esteem. Throughout 1965, Nzeogwu spoke freely and openly to some young officers about his intention to stage a revolution which would bring Nigeria to the path of greatness. Listen. Adewale Ademoyega says in the book Why We Struck that throughout 1965, Nzeogwu spoke freely and openly to some young officers about his intention to stage a revolution which would bring Nigeria to the path of greatness. So Nzeogwu spoke openly about the coup. So how come the political leadership did not arrest him? How come the political leadership did not prepare for that day? You know, some have accused Nnamdi Azikiwe of running away. But Nzeogwu spoke openly about the coup. Azikiwe ran away, others did not run away. Let's bring in Chuk Silwegbunam. In this interview, Chuk Silwegbunam talks about them knowing that a coup was coming. Chuk Silwegbunam is the author of this book, another classic, Ironsi. We're also going to review this book today. Chuk Silwegbunam is the author of Ironsi, Nigeria, the Army, Power, and Politics. Chuk Silwegbunam on State Affairs. Now, this question of a northern coup, let's probe it further. I remember Akintola visiting the Sardauna.
Yes.
A day before the January 15th coup. He was in the north. You find that argument in Femi Kende's book, Ladoke, Akintola and the Eye of History. So by January 14th, Sardauna and Co had the premonition that there would be a coup. So do you believe if they were planning a coup and they knew there was going to be a coup, they should have acted, but yet they refused to act?
At that point in time, what Akintola and Ahmadu Bello had couldn't be described as premonition. They knew that a military action was possible because they had been told. Even Ironsi himself traveled to Bauchi to go and see the prime minister who was on leave to say, look, this is what I'm hearing. It's in this book. These young officers are trying to move. He didn't believe the story, but many other sources mentioned to them that there was this likelihood of the young officers striking. So it wasn't a question of premonition.
So why did you think they did not act to prevent the coup?
Yes, there's an explanation. Ahmadu Bello was known to have said that if you pointed a gun at him and pressed the trigger, if Allah said he won't die, the bullet will not strike him. So there was that sense of submission to the ultimate will of God, that nothing happened unless the Almighty sanctioned it. I don't think he believed that it was possible for that action to take place.
And the action took place.
It did take place, yes.
It was a bloody action.
Yes, it was.
Very bloody.
Yes.
Should it have been that bloody?
Well, I can't place any premium on bloody comparisons because I'm not a man of violence, you know. So you couldn't say, should it have been that bloody? What amount of blood is enough? That's one question you have to ask yourself. Secondly, what's the purpose of a revolution? What's the possibility of making an omelette without breaking an egg? You could ask yourself all those questions. But it did happen, and it was bloody.
So they knew about the coup. Nnamdi Azikiwe knew about the coup. Akintola knew about the coup. Ahmadu Bello knew about the coup. But they did not run away. And they paid the price. Nnamdi Azikiwe knew about the coup and ran away. Do not forget, Adewale Ademoyiga said that throughout 1965, Nzeogwu spoke freely and openly to young officers about his intention to stage a revolution which would bring Nigeria to the path of greatness. You find that on page 69 of the book, Why We Struck. And if you are still on page 69, the last paragraph reads, by 1965, Nigeria had only one major general, that is J.T. Aguiyi-Ironsi, the GOC of the army. There were 3 brigadiers, Ademulegun, Mai Malari, and Ogundikbe. 3 colonels, Adebayo, Kor Mohammed, and Shudende, and a few lieutenant colonels, and many majors. Because the question remains, how come that Igbos dominated the coup? Let's read on. The senior officers, that is colonels and above, were totally committed to the Balewa government and were preoccupied with sustaining Balewa in power and preserving themselves in the upper hierarchy of the army. When we labeled an officer as not being political, we meant that the officer did not understand the principles and practice of political army. We did not imply that the officer did not understand the Nigerian political game of you chop, I chop, or you wash my hands and I wash your hands, or he is my brother and I must support him, and so on. Ademoyega says of the lieutenant colonels, only 2 were known to be political and revolutionary, and were willing to take part in any effort to revolutionize Nigeria. Now, this is an interesting part. Of the lieutenant colonels, only 2 were known to be political and revolutionary, and were willing to take part in any effort to revolutionize Nigeria. These were Lieutenant Colonels Banjo and Fajui. You remember Fajui? Fajui later became the governor of the Western region when Ojukwu became the governor of the Eastern region. Fajui and Ironsi were killed on the same day. Adewale Ademoyega said Fajui was a revolutionary officer. You remember Banjo? Victor Banjo that later fought on the side of Biafra. You remember how he died? Have you listened to my interview with Victor Banjo's daughter? Adewale Ademoyega said Victor Banjo was also revolutionary. For reasons that are later explained, neither of them actually took part in the coup of January 15th. Lieutenant Colonels Ojukwu and Nzeogwu were unsure and preferred to adopt the "if you boys succeed, we shall go along with you" attitude. The others were committed to the Balewa government like their senior ranks. One of them, Lieutenant Colonel Lagema, who was then commanding the 4th Battalion in Ibadan, was known to be publicly associated with the Akintola government and taught the premier and his ministers the use of fighting weapons like rifles and submachine guns. So it was Lagema that taught them. You know, Lagema was also killed in the coup. Can you see the connection? Because I've been asking, why did they kill Lagema? If you read this line, one of them, Lieutenant Colonel Lagema, who was then commanding the 4th Battalion in Ibadan, was known to be publicly associated with the Akintola government and taught Akintola and his ministers the use of fighting weapons like rifles and submachine guns. The majors were a mixed grill, many of them non-revolutionary and indifferent. Majority of them were committed through their allegiance to specific senior officers, to the Balewa government, so that only a handful were revolutionary and willing to take part in changing the order of things. These few actually took part in the coup. He says, I had earlier related my first meeting with Lieutenant Ifajuna in the days prior to my enlistment into the army. That is, at the time I went before the selection board. Then we reached the conclusion that it was the military that was likely to provide the ultimate solution to the Nigerian political problems. We bore this in mind and did not have to consider the matter. It was always a question of when the hour comes. In December 1963, when we were together in Kaduna, Ifajuna and I moved closer to each other and discussed vital political, intellectual, and revolutionary matters. Since Ifajuna's wife was not around at that time, he lived in the single officers' quarters, so that we were together most of the time. So the three brains behind the coup were Adewale Ademoyega, Emmanuel Ifajuna, and Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu. Adewale Ademoyega goes on to list or to explain and define the characters of all of those who were part of the coup. But I want us to look at how he defined Ifajuna. You know, it's an interesting read. Remember, you can join the discourse. You can call in. You can call the number scrolling on the screen to join the discourse. That is 080 18449. The number to call is 080 18449. That's the number to call to be part of this discourse. So let's see how Ademoyega defined Ifajuna. He says, unlike Nzeogwu, Ifajuna was a relatively quiet and more secretive personality with a rather complicated character. On the other hand, he was intensely political and revolutionary. On the other, he was not very open-hearted and did not naturally attract many young officers to himself. Nevertheless, he was very influential among the ones that were close to him. Like Nzeogwu, Ifajuna was open-handed, generous, and was willing to sacrifice anything for the revolution. But at the same time, he always wanted to be in the good books of the senior officers in order to ensure his promotion in any event. These conflicting desires often clashed within him, making him inconsistent and at times unreliable. Like Nzeogwu, I believed that a revolutionary had to be single-minded and devoted to his ideals in complete disregard of his personal fortunes and safety. Ifajuna left Kaduna for India late in April 1964, and when he returned later that year, he was posted to Lagos as the brigade major of the 2nd Brigade based at Apapa. It was not until I moved down to Abeokuta in September 1965 that we got in close touch with each other again. Another captain that participated in the coup is Christian Anufuru. He also defines his character. Then Timothy Onwatuegu. You heard Shulakbe Ademulegun talking about Timothy Onwatuegu. There was also Major Donatus Okafor. Major Donatus Okafor. He was an officer commissioned from the ranks and was therefore not really revolutionary, according to Adewale Ademoyega. I can see Your Might here. Your Might says, Awo knew that if the feudal system in the north is not destroyed, it was just a matter of time that such a system will be replicated in every part of Nigeria. And that is what we have today. That is Your Might. Your Might, thank you for your comment. Your Might also has another comment here saying Awolowo clamored for the other ethnic minorities in the north and the east to be independent from their stranglehold. But the north and the east teamed together and divided the west instead. Yes, they carved out the Midwest from the west. And to me, that was not fair. It was just a plot to withhold the power of Obafemi Awolowo. Yes, I think he was marked for discipline. They wanted to discipline him in their own way. And the creation of the Midwest from the Western region was one way to reduce his powers. I'm asking, how come the Igbos came to dominate the officer corps of the army? Let's bring in Chuk Sulegbunam here. He explains how Igbos came to dominate the officer corps. Chuk Sulegbunam is the author of this book, Ironsi, Nigeria, the Army, Power, and Politics. We've not read from this book yet, but we will. Let's listen to Chuk Sulegbunam. Lest I forget, how did Igbo officers come to dominate the officer corps when the... Lest I forget, how did Igbo officers come to dominate the officer corps when the colonialists were in charge?
I will tell you. It's a very easy question to answer. People who started to enter the army did so from after the Second World War. After the 50s, 60s. At that time, for you to go into the officer corps, you've got to have school certificate. By the time they got the first secondary school in northern Nigeria as a whole, I think it's Barawa College, one of those schools, you had scores of secondary schools in southern Nigeria. So a lot of them from the north didn't have the qualification to go into the officer corps. That was why they were not represented there.
There was no quota system.
There was no quota system at that time. So all those guys who went to CKC, CIC, King's College, whatever, Bishop Shanahan, with a good school start, you go there, the white man will look at your certificate and list you. And then you went for officer training. If you didn't have it, you didn't go in. Yes. Even one of their own major medics, Major General Buhari, up to today, we have not seen his school certificate. Those were the people who came in when Sardauna was there. And whether, if it is right, cut it. If it is not right, cut it. They were just being flooded into the army at that time. Up to today, Buhari has not shown his school certificate. That is the truth.
So you see how Igbos came to dominate the officer corps Because if you look at the list, we've talked about Timothy Onwatuegu, Donatus Okafor, Major Donatus Okafor, Kaduna Nzeogwu, Ifajuna, Adewale Ademoyega. Look at what Adewale Ademoyega said. You know, Donatus Okafor was the one stationed to take out Aguiyi Ironsi. He was the one stationed to take out Aguiyi Ironsi. But when he saw his man, he froze. When he saw Aguiyi Ironsi, he froze. This is how Adewale Ademoyega defines Major Donatus Okafor. He was an officer commissioned from the ranks and was therefore not really revolutionary. He was brought in mainly because of the appointment which he had throughout 1965 until January 15, 1966, than for his revolutionary ideals and practices. So how would you give such a man who was not revolutionary the task of taking down the GOC? I need to ask them that question. He was brought in mainly because of the appointment which he had throughout 1965 and until January 15th, 1966, than for his revolutionary ideals and practice. And yet you stationed a non-revolutionary man to take out the GOC, the head of the army. And when he saw Aguiyi Ironsi, he froze. This did not imply that an officer from the ranks could not be revolutionary or political. He could be. Only he would be a rare bird. Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi was like that. He was revolutionary, political, and intensely patriotic. But then, Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi was an extremely brave soldier, which was why he won the Military Cross Award for an act of exemplary bravery during his service with the United Nations in the Congo. Donatus Okafor was not exactly like that. He was neither a revolutionary nor an idealist. He was rough-hewn and matter of fact. He also talked about Major Humphrey Chukwuka. These were the guys who carried out the coup. On page 75, Adewale Ademoyega talks about Major Humphrey Chukwuka, who with me survived the Civil War, was a Sandhurst-trained officer. He was commissioned in 1960. One of the 7 majors who eventually took part in the coup. You know, we hear about 5 majors. But there were more than 5. And they were mostly Igbo officers. So now, let's trace it. Ilebunam had explained how Igbos came to dominate the army. So let's read from Ilebunam's book, Ironsi. Let's read from that book. But before we read from that book, I was talking about Obafemi Awolowo and the state of emergency that was declared in the Western region, and how Obafemi Awolowo was brought before the Coca Commission. That was the travails of democracy. Was Awolowo guilty of financial mismanagement in the Western region? We'll look at that subject on a fresh package And that is what we are going to dwell on. We'll look at the Coup Commission, but not today. For now, we are focused on the events that led to the coup itself and its aftermath. Awolowo predicted the coup. That's the point I'm making here. Remember, Awolowo and 30 of his political associates were accused by the federal government of plotting a coup to overthrow it. Consequently, they were charged to court for treasonable felony, conspiracy to commit a felony, and conspiracy to effect an unlawful purpose. Obafemi Awolowo was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment with hard labor on the 11th of September, 1963. Before sentencing him, Justice George Shudende Showemimo of the Lagos High Court listened as Awolowo made a statement. I want us to go through Awolowo's statement. In court, Awolowo gave an allocutus stating, I read, "Since 1957, I have fought, as your lordship remarked, with vigor against the feudal system in the northern region and for its eradication." Hey. Since 1957, I have fought, as your lordship remarked, with vigor against the feudal system in the northern region and for its eradication. I have also fought to prevent the spread of this evil political system to other parts of Nigeria. And the judge, shouldn't this show any more? Awo continues, during this same period, I have strongly advocated the breaking up of northern region into more states in order to have true federation in Nigeria, to preclude the permanent subservience of the people of Nigeria to the autocratic ruling caste in the north, and to preserve peace and unity in Nigeria. So Awo's fight was the north. So perhaps he was so disappointed that the north he was fighting, his deputy went behind him to ally with them. And perhaps he could not forgive Akintola for doing that. Akintola had his reasons. Akintola wanted a cooperation with the north. So when Awolowo refused to step down and they felt he was stubborn, perhaps they said, let's deal with him. So they charged him with treasonable felony. Did he plan a coup against the Tafawa Balewa government? We'll come to that. He says in short, I have always fought for what I believe without relenting and regardless of consequences to myself. I have no doubt, and I say this without any spirit of immodesty, that in the course of my political career, I have rendered services to this country which historians and the coming generations will certainly regard as imperishable. He was right. You can see I've been talking about Awo. Because the last straw that broke the camel's back was Operation Wet here in the western region. It annoyed the majors in the army and they struck. So it was about the western region. And it was connected to the northern region. You can see in this analysis, the east is quiet. The east has not been mentioned. It was mainly the fight between the western region and the northern region. Awolowo continues, I personally welcome any sentence you may impose upon me, he said to George Shudendi. At this moment, my only concern is not for myself, but that my imprisonment might do harm to Nigeria. For some time to come, the present twilight of democracy, individual freedom, and the rule of law will change or might change into utter darkness. He prophesied in court that for the time to come, the present twilight of democracy, individual freedom, and the rule of law will change or might change into utter darkness. Yes, and democracy crashed in 1966 following the first coup. And democracy suffered more in July 1966 following the counter-coup. And democracy crashed in 1967, leading to the Nigerian Civil War. A war fought from 1967 to 1970. Was Awolowo not right with his prediction? He saw it coming. Awolowo was released from prison in 1967. But remember, the discontent bred by the trial, the anger from the Caucus Commission findings, and the severely flawed Western Region election of 1965 culminated in Operation Weretear, when many were killed in Yoruba land to settle political scores. Following Weretear was the January 1966 coup that took the lives of Balewa, Ahmadu Bello, Akintola, and other political and military leaders, leading to the Nigerian Civil War. You know, we've been mentioning Akintola. Akintola did not write his story, as far as I know. But brilliant researchers have written the Akintola story. And one of the most authoritative work on Akintola is this book. I'm going to read from this book, but not today. Not today. But I just want you to know this book. S. Ladoke Akintola, His Life and Times, written by Professor Jide Oshutokun. It is an authoritative work on Akintola. If you read the book, you will understand Akintola's politics. You would understand his position in the struggle with his leader, Obafemi Awolowo. I recommend this book to you. S. Ladoke Akintola, His Life and Times, by Professor Akinjide Oshutokun. Another authoritative work on Akintola is this one, Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the Eyes of History. Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the Eyes of History, by Femi Kehinde. Femi Kehinde narrated how Akintola was killed. the army officer that led the charge against him. In this book, Femi Kehinde said at some point, Akintola got fed up with the fight with Awolowo, that he felt like going to apologize. The tension was getting too much for him. He could not govern well. There was so much tension. You know, Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the eyes of history. I've interviewed Femi Kehinde on this book. It is on this channel. You can listen to the interview on Akintola. This is a beautiful book. So we have two books on Akintola. S. Ladoke Akintola, His Life and Times, and Samuel Ladoke Akintola. These books are on udarabooks.com, and you can also get them through the WhatsApp number displayed on the screen. Read about Akintola. When the coup came, did he fire at them? Did he fire at them? So you can join the discourse by calling our number. We are ready to listen to you now. So you can call the number 080-999-18449. Call us on WhatsApp. WhatsApp call. Call us on WhatsApp. 080-999-18449. Now, before the January coup, was there a planned coup by the North before the January coup? Was the North planning its own coup? Because if you read some books, there is the allusion that the North was planning a coup. So let's bring back Chuk Siluegbunam, who talks about MPC planned coup. MPC, Northern People's Congress, led by Ahmadu Bello. Let's reflect on that. Let's talk about your book.
Of course.
In the preface of the let's talk about your book.
Of course.
In the preface of the work, you quoted Major General M.C. Ali. Ali says the January 15th, 1966 coup was staged to preempt a Northern People's Congress inspired coup. Why did you quote this section?
Yes, because in 1966, after the first coup took place, the organizers and perpetrators of the coup said it happened to preempt a northern coup that was coming. Nobody believed the story at that time. So when we have somebody like Major General M.C. Ali validating that story, and then we also have Mr. Trevor Clark, a colonial officer, British colonial officer, validating the story again, it makes it beyond, it puts it beyond question that it is the truth. That there was a coup planned by the NPC government called Operation No Mercy. It was to happen days before the January 15, 1966 coup. That's why I quoted the two gentlemen there. There isn't any doubt about the veracity of that story.
So what you call a northern planned coup can also be defined as the Hausa Fulani coup.
In the days when that event happened, you didn't really have that conjoined name of Hausa Fulani. They made mostly Hausa, but you can call it Fulani coup. not Hausa coup. Sardauna of Sokoto was Fulani. He was the person in charge of the government, not the prime minister, who was Hausa. Balewa was not in charge, it was Sardauna. So it was a Fulani thing. They were the people controlling the army.
So Ilegbunam is using his book to validate the notion that there was a planned coup to be carried out by Fulani officers before Nzeogwu and Co struck.
Yes.
So if you read this book by Chukwu Ilegbunam, you will see the dimensions of events. And this is one book I love. And it was a delight interviewing the author of the book. You can watch the video on the channel. Let's read from this book. Ironsi, Nigeria, the Army, Power and Politics. But let me give you a brief of the book. The book talks about the squad that carried out the coup in the north on page 4. He talks about the men who helped to crush the coup. If you check page 5 of the book. Failure to arrest in Ironsi and the conversation between Ademoyega and Okafor, you find that on page 5 of the book. But that is one area that defines the coup as an Igbo coup. So I want us to look at that page 5 because we've talked about Okafor. So let's read from page 5 of the book Ironsi. He quotes Colonel Hans Anago. The author quotes Colonel Hans Anago. He says, Gowon knows very well that it was my company, D Company, 2nd Battalion, Nigeria Army, which occupied Lagos from Ikeja as spearhead of the loyal troops. Records show and history would tell that I was the commander of that company. You know, there are some records that claim that Yakubu Gowon stopped the coup. But in this book, it is Colonel Hans Anago that led the charge in Lagos to counter the coup, the January coup. And you see the quote from Colonel Hans Anago on page 5 of Ironsi. The principal reason why state power eluded the coup makers of January 15th, 1966 was Major General J.T.U. Aguyi Ironsi, the general officer commanding the Nigerian Army. When Major Donatus Okafor and his men got to Ironsi's official residence, they discovered that the GOC was not there. This tense dialogue between Majors Ademoyega and Okafor underlines the fact and explains its consequences. So here is a dialogue between Ademoyega and Okafor. Ademoyega says, "What has happened to you and what have you achieved?" Okafor replies, "I have just lost my command." Ademoyega says, "Oh no, what have you done wrong? What's all this about?" Okafor says, "I spoke to my RSM just now and he nearly shot me. He said the GOC had been to the barracks. I did not meet him there." Ademoyega replies, "What? Did he escape from you?" Okafor says, I went to his house to arrest him. I found that he was not there. He had not returned from the party. You know, there was a party in Lagos on the 14th before the struck on the 15th. Then Ademoyega replies, which party? Everyone had left the party since 9 last night. Okafor says, no, it was another party. He had been to another party after May Malari's party. Now, he had been in here. He commanded the troops not to take orders from me, and none of them would obey me now. In fact, they were ready to shoot me. You see, Okafor had lost his man. Chusule Bunam says, what happened was that shortly after Okafor and his men left in disappointment, the GOC returned to his residence just in time to receive 2 telephone calls, one from Colonel James Yakubu Pam and the other from Sir Abubakar, the Prime Minister, informing him that they were being attacked. It was just about 3:00 hours. The general hopped into his car and headed for the Federal Guards Barrack, the now famous Dodan Barracks, Ikoyi. The place was in some confusion, and Major Okafor, its commander, was nowhere to be seen. Worse still for Ironsi was the information that there had been troop movement from the barracks. He ordered the regimental sergeant major to take charge and not to take orders from any officer. The general officer's order was clear evidence that he had become convinced that there was trouble in the army. Having given his orders to the RSM, the general continued on to Ikeja. Ironsi evaded all but one of the checkpoints being mounted on Major Ademoyega's orders. The one checkpoint where his car was stopped was commanded by Captain Ugbo Oji. The soldiers pointed their guns at him. Ironsi climbed out, stood straight, and roared, "Get out of my way!" And they all moved away. This was somebody they ought to have dealt with, but they all moved away. That was the GOC in charge. Okay? You know, I've been saying Captain Okafor, Captain Okafor. I've been wanting to mention Captain Ugbo Oji. You know, he saw the GOC. He should have opened fire on him, but he did not open fire. And the GOC said, "Get out of the way." And they moved. You want to read more of the interaction of the coup? This is the book to read, Ironsi, Nigeria, the Army, Power and Politics, by Chuks Iluegbunam. This is the book to read. Hey, you know, reading the book, I needed to highlight areas you should read. Major John Obienu failed to turn up for the January coup. Why? Ifajuna lamented about obvious betrayal on page 9 of the book. We will read them, but not on this edition. When we get to the D-Day, the D-Day, we will read more of the story. But I will bring you reminiscences of the D-Day. Let's bring back Sholakwe Ademulegun to tell us the story of the D-Day. You see, Sholakwe says here that one, her father knew about the coup. That is Brigadier Samuel Ademulegun, who was killed on the D-Day. Let's go back and say that her father, the brigadier, knew about the coup. Your dad was told about the coup.
Yes, he was.
He still traveled to Kaduna.
Yes, he did.
He knew there was going to be a coup.
Yes, he did.
So why did he travel?
General Olutoye, who is like a father to us, told me that my father knew, maybe intelligence reports, maybe whatever you call it, but he wanted to protect his family. He didn't want to be seen as the coward who knew that something was going to happen and then he stayed back, stayed away, and then put his family in danger.
But he eventually put his family in danger.
Well, we're still alive, aren't we?
Your mom is no more.
Well, maybe that's how it was destined to be.
You grew up as an orphan.
Yes, yes.
So Brigadier Ademulegwu knew about the coup, yet he returned to Kaduna, right? His daughter just confirmed that her father knew that they were planning a coup and he was advised not to travel to Kaduna. Yet, he traveled to Kaduna. Let's listen to her again. Shulakwe Ademulegwu. Remember, in the first story she told, she narrated how her daddy was killed. Now, she talks about the operations of the coupists that day. So let's listen to her story.
But at a point like that, maybe the brain is not functioning well. Maybe one is not thinking straight. Maybe at that point, all she was thinking was, you can't kill this man. You know what I mean? You can't kill this man. He's the love of my life. You can't kill this man. He's the father of my children. You can't kill this man. He's the father of, my father had 6 of us. I don't know. But I guess in that kind of situation, I don't think one's brain will function well.
You know, your father was one of the toppest of the military officers of the time.
So I hear.
After Basi Ironsi, he was number 3.
Yes. Brigadier Basi, by the way, was my godfather. And I had a wonderful relationship with him. And I still have with his children. And a year or 2 before he passed on, I went to cover an assignment in Akwa Ibom State, Uyo, where he lived after retirement and he had become, pretty old. I went there. Oh, I'm so glad I did. He was so happy to see me. And I was so glad that I saw him at least that one last time. Because about a year or so later, I heard that he died. Yeah. He was pretty close to Brigadier Basi.
After the coup struck, you were left there crying.
Yes. Yes.
And you were taken out of the house with your brother.
Yes. I had an older brother who was on holidays from school, who was there, but he was not in that room. He was in his room across the landing, the other side of the staircase. He had heard the gunshots. His name is Bankole. We lost him about a year ago. I miss him so much. Anyways, he had heard the gunshots and he peeped. He knew he couldn't go in, by 6, 7, 8 soldiers. I don't remember the number. So he went back to his room. So when they had finished, their deed, he came in and took my younger brother and I through the night, through the dark, into the boys' quarters until help came.
Your younger brother was 4 at the time?
Yes. Yes.
Help came?
Yes.
What kind of help?
Well, I think it was Mrs. Ironsi, actually, who came to collect us the next morning from the boys' quarters. And then we were taken to an orphanage in Kaduna, Queen Amina Orphanage, which was run by the Catholic missionaries. I think it was Mrs. Ironsi.
Have you asked yourself how they gained entrance into the house? That was the top brigadier in the north.
And we had guards at the gates.
Have you reflected on that?
Yeah. Maybe that's what they call compromise, right? Or the guards were other ranks. Corporals, lance corporals, and so on. the people who came, the guy who led the team was a major. Would he say to them, open the gate, and they won't? No, they will.
You also saw Sardauna of Sokoto and Ahmadu Bello while growing up?
Yeah, a few times. Yeah, I would go with my dad. I remember in the Sardauna's palace, we would sit on the floor. And it was really something different, you know, and it was nice. And that's where I learned to eat masa. I think it was, yeah, my mom was Muslim. So, you know, sometimes during the fasting period, would go visit the Sardauna. Yes, I knew him.
Can you still remember his personality?
No. I know he used to wear white a lot. He used to cover his head. And even when he wore shoes, it was white. Really nice man.
What was the compound like?
Very large. We would first drive in, like what, half a kilometer, a whole kilometer, and then another gate, and then in again. Yeah, it was very big.
You talked about people around the Sardauna. You mentioned the Marjories.
Oh, yeah. You know, I said there's a long drive in.
Yeah.
So we would find people sitting around there like beggars, like, you know, people praying, you know. So left and right, there'd be people sitting as we drove in. He used to feed them. He was a kind man. He used to feed them.
In this story, Koneshude and this wife keeps coming in.
Yes.
Why the Coupes were in your house?
Yes.
She tried reaching your family through the phone.
Yes.
It was too late.
Yes. They had apparently gone to their house. So she tried to warn maybe my mom, I don't know. She kept calling. You know those old analog phones? The black ones that sit on, yeah. It was downstairs. Yeah, but it was too late.
Her husband had been killed by this time.
I believe so. Otherwise, or maybe they had just come in. I'm not sure. I'm sure he would have been killed. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to call. But she kept calling to warn us. But it was too. I met her years after. And we talked about it.
What did she tell you?
Same old. They came, killed him. I think they hurt her arm. And she showed me the point where the bullet went through. I haven't heard from her in many years now. I don't know if she's still alive.
Now, this is the name on every mouth. Nzeogwu. That's the name in every mouth. Nzeogwu. Obasanjo wrote about Nzeogwu. So this is Obasanjo's book entitled Nzeogwu. And I'm going to read Nzeogwu. Nzeogwu is a classic that we must read. So get your Nzeogwu before we come to this class to read his book. Get your copy of Nzeogwu. You can get your copy on udarabooks.com, or through the WhatsApp number on the screen. It is Nzeogwu, and Nzeogwu. In the morning, it is Nzeogwu. In the afternoon, it is Nzeogwu. When you talk about the coup, you talk about Nzeogwu. Now let me show you the connection between Nzeogwu and Obasanjo from the mouth of those who knew them. And Adewale Ademoyega is one of them. I'm making reference to books, different opinions, so that we will understand why things were the way they were. And more books will come. Remember, this is the class of history, politics, and power. Adewale Ademoyega says, then in 1963, I was posted to the 5th Battalion in Kaduna. A few months later, Nzeogwu was posted to the Nigeria Military Training College in Kaduna. We were both single, unmarried officers. Before Nzeogwu arrived in Kaduna, I lived in the quarters meant for unmarried officers. I was sharing a 2-bedroom bungalow with Captain Olusegun Obasanjo. This same Baba, he has been around. He has been around. Olusegun Obasanjo has been around. So he was a flatmate to Adewale Ademoyiga in Kaduna. He said, I was sharing a 2-bedroom bungalow with Captain Olusegun Obasanjo, who, although married, lived without his wife at that time. He was away for some time, and Nzeogwu came and took over his room. And Nzeogwu came and took over his room. Obasanjo was also Nzeogwu's friend, so that whenever he was around, he shared the same bed with Nzeogwu. Obasanjo and Nzeogwu shared the same bed. At that time, Obasanjo was in the Nigerian Army Engineering Corps. He was a quiet, colorless, and easygoing officer who did not attract any personal recognition and would not be reckoned with as revolutionary. His friendship with Nzeogwu derived mainly from the latter's ready friendliness towards all officers that were close to him. Living with Nzeogwu gave me a deep insight into his character. He was the son of a civil servant. His parents hailed from Asaba in the Midwest, now Bendel, now Delta State. But he was born in Kaduna, schooled in Kaduna, and grew up in Kaduna. He spoke Hausa fluently, and he understood and had many Hausa traits. Nzeogwu was born in Kaduna, schooled in Kaduna, grew up in Kaduna. And you can see that is why his name is Kaduna Nzeogwu. So you have seen the connection between Obasanjo and Nzeogwu. And that is why you should read this book. We are going to bring this book into this class to read this book. By the time we are reading this book, we want you to have your copy of the book so that you would read along. This program is meant to encourage reading, deep research on national and international affairs. It is meant for the deep. You want to deepen your understanding of politics? This is the show for you. You want to understand history and learn from it? This is the show for you. And getting books, reading ahead, will help to understand, so that you can also have the opportunity to teach us, to lecture us when you call in. So you can call in before we round off if you still have a lot to say. The numbers are on the screen. So Nzeogwu is a classic by Olusegun Obasanjo. The books are on udarabooks.com. As we round off, let me draw you to this point. One of the reasons the Igbos went to war is what has been defined as Biafra as resistance of militant Arabism. Awolowo fought against feudal concept in the north. Now, at the height of the Nigerian Civil War, the leader of Biafra, Colonel Emeka Ojukwu, on the 1st of June 1969, in an inspiring speech, highlighted the principles of the Biafran Revolution as enshrined in the Ahhiara Declaration. A critical analysis of the document shows the drawback of the Nigerian system as a result of its social and structural formations. In the declaration, Biafrans note that despite fighting in the highest traditions of Christian civilization, Western powers, the very custodians of this civilization, joined resources with the Muslim Hausa Fulani oligarchy to fight them. In this protestation is the question of religion, a factor fundamental to the understanding of the Igbo notion of Nigeria. It is an explanation of the opposition of the Igbo to the dominance of the Muslim North that controlled political power, leading to our dangerous war. So what the Igbos did was to use the Ahhiara Declaration to emphasize the resistance to the Islamic contagion. That is how they used it in Ahhiara Declaration. So they emphasize the resistance to Islamic contagion championed by the Arabs from the Near East that swept through the Sahara to northern Nigeria. The Igbo assert that the Biafran struggle is a resistance of Arab-Muslim expansionism, refusing to buckle at militant Arabism as an instrument of attaining political power. Have you read the Ahhiara Declaration as an Igbo man? Yes. Are you an Igbo man? Have you read the Ahhiara Declaration? It's online, you can download it. Because it's one of the subjects we are going to treat as we go on this analysis. I'm just teasing you now with a preamble, just to whet your appetite. We are going to dedicate a show to Ahhiara Declaration. Meanwhile, the vision of Biafra, as enshrined in the document, is the creation of a hopeful, prosperous, just, and happy society achieved through a struggle against the forces of religion, injustice, racism, colonialism, corruption, and oppression. The document emphasizes the Biafran state with a new character and structure. From this analysis, one can conclude that religion is a drawback of the Nigerian state. How do we take advantage of religion to serve the common good? Can we create a new Nigeria with a new character and structure? If Nigeria refuses to redefine its political structure, will Biafra come? As you think about that question, let's round off with Awolowo's definition of the ethnic factor. We also look at Zeke's definition of the ethnic factor. Awolowo says, I quote Awo, in embracing Western culture, the Yorubas take the lead and have benefited immensely as a result. The Efiks, the Ijos, the Ibibios, and the Igbos come next. The Hausa and the Fulanese, on the other hand, are extremely conservative and take reluctantly the Western civilization. And if the race is to the swift, in spite of their lower cultural background, the Igbos or the Ibibios would certainly qualify for self-government long before the Hausas. Awolowo made this statement before independence. Now, this is what Zeke said before independence. Zik says, that is Nnamdi Azikiwe, he says the God of Africa has especially created the Igbo nation to lead the children of Africa from the bondage of the ages. The martial prowess of the Igbo nation at all stages of human history has enabled them not only to conquer others, but also to adapt themselves to the role of the preserver. Zik says that the Igbo nation cannot shirk its responsibility. With those quotations from Obafemi Awolowo and Nnamdi Azikiwe, we'll round off this edition of State Affairs. We will be back on Thursday for another edition of the program. Thank you for being there, and thank you for spending your time with us. We were supposed to start at 5:30. Yes, we started, but we had severe internet disruption, so we had to suspend the broadcast for about an hour to sort out the internet, and we came back. So here we are, we've done it, and we will do it again on Thursday. Thank you for being there.